And this is a picture of the airplane that we built. It took us about 4.5 years, and this is what we used to travel to Prince Edward Island in. The day before we left on our trip was pretty much the plane had just completed all of its test phases, and we just did one test flight, and that's this little video coming up after this picture is just right after I completed the final test flight before we were getting ready to leave on our trip. So Adrian was just recording me coming back here.
How was the test flight?
Well, test flight went well. It was a little bit turbulent though.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
On and off?
Okay, this is a photo of the aviation map, and that you can see our route, how we went to Kingston. This is August the 8th, 2016, and we flew 361 kilometers, which took us about roughly 2 hours to do. And this is the first time now that we've left the vicinity of the airport in the airplane, and it was pretty exciting for us. Just beginning of a nice long journey of adventure. Here we are in Kingston now. We didn't take too many pictures when we were in Kingston, but we did have quite a bit of excitement after landing in Kingston. One of these big Dash 8 airplanes showed up, and a bunch of armed guards came out, and it turns out they were transferring prisoners from one prison to another, and there was some interesting looking people dressed up in chains and guards completely surrounding the plane. And we wound up, we didn't want to take any pictures. We thought they just might not like that. And here's a picture of Adrian in Kingston receiving a bear hug from a bear. We spent the night in Kingston, and we got ready to head out the next morning. And this picture of the map here is showing us from our route as we left the Kingston airport and we headed over to Montreal. We basically just flew along the St. Lawrence River using our GPS technology as well as just following the river. It was quite enjoyable. Here we are landing in a small, here's where we landed at a small airport just outside Montreal. We stayed there for a few hours while we decided our next bit of flying, because we had to fly around a bunch of different height restrictions and control zones to get around the Montreal airport. It was a little confusing, and it was quite challenging actually. So you can see the red line and how we went around. The red line was our route and how we went around the Montreal control zones, and just avoiding too much congestion from the airports and restrictions from Montreal. So we passed Montreal and we headed over to Quebec City, and that took us about, from what I can see here, roughly 2 hours, 305 kilometers. And again, just sort of flying in a straight line after we passed Montreal. This is a picture of me standing beside the airplane just after landing at the airport just outside of Quebec City, and we're getting ready to find a place to stay, which wasn't that easy. It's quite popular there, and we did a fair bit of driving around in a taxi, which cost us a fortune, but eventually we found a place. I think it was one of the universities in Quebec City.
On this visit to Quebec City, we decided to take a look more at the architecture of some of the areas that were a little bit more off the beaten path. And we came to this neighborhood in behind the main area of Quebec City, and we walked all through these streets and saw a lot of older Quebec City.
This was a busker show in front of the Chateau Frontenac. This was a woman who performed all kinds of interesting tricks with a giant hula hoop, and she traveled all the way from Australia to put this show on, and it was quite amazing. It was quite a highlight of our trip. There's a short video of this woman doing some of her acrobats using the hula hoop, and got It was a pretty impressive show that she put on anyway. So we asked her after the show, what path led you to a career in this? And she said she just was no good at anything else. So she said it was total randomness that got her involved in this. We stayed 2 nights in Quebec City, and we had a great time. We used Uber to get around a little bit. That made it a bit easier. And yeah, we had perfect weather as well, so that just added to it. The next leg of our journey took us from Quebec City to Edmundston, New Brunswick, which was roughly 300 kilometers. It took us, I see here, about an hour and 42 minutes. Again, following the St. Lawrence River all the way to River de Loup, and then we started to head in a different direction over to Edmundston, just to avoid flying over the mountain tops and encountering a little too much turbulence. So this was a more smooth route. Adrian took this picture of me flying over the St. Lawrence River on our way to River de Loup. I think it was one of the first photos we took while flying in the plane. Over here on the map you can see we went from River de Loup to Edmundston. Landing at Edmundston was quite challenging. It was almost in a canyon and it was fairly windy. So yeah, it was a good challenge and good practice for me. And here we are at Edmundston Airport, and we just refueled. We didn't stay very long. There wasn't much there for us. We just kind of wanted to get going. So we refueled and off we went. And here we are. We left Edmundston and we headed over towards Grand Falls. And we're just on the border of the state of Maine. So we're trying to stay out of the U.S. and we're just following the border all the way down and then over across to Fredericton. It took us, from what I see, 2 hours to do 272 kilometers. When we arrived in Fredericton, it turns out they had a Chinese flight school, and they had all these Chinese students learning how to fly. And I guess in this picture here you can sort of see somebody was getting dunked with 5-gallon pails of water. He must have just gone solo. So we filmed that and watched that for a few minutes. That was kind of fun to see. After we left Fredericton, you can see on the map here that there's a bit of a zigzag line, and we wound up getting clearance to fly from Fredericton to Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, but there was a problem. As we were heading over there, we encountered low clouds, and we couldn't fly above them, and we couldn't fly below them. Even my GPS was saying terrain, terrain. So we diverted over to an airport called Chipman, which was actually a private airport owned by Irving Gas Company. Anyway, we landed there. We waited for the weather to improve for a couple hours as we walked around and went for a pizza at a local store, and then we departed on our way from that point on. After we left the Chipman Airport, you can see our route of flight taking us to Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. One of my concerns was flying over the water. There was a 13-kilometer stretch of water along the Confederation Bridge, and I had to make sure I gained enough altitude while flying over the water. Should I have an engine failure, I could glide to the shoreline on either end. If you land in the water, it's pretty well a hopeless situation. So, but it went uneventful, and I think we climbed up to 5,500 feet just to give us enough height in case something went wrong with the engine.
One of the things that was most remarkable about flying over the water was seeing the patterns in the water and in the mud and the red mud in the both right on the New Brunswick shore and at Prince Edward Island. So there's a number of lovely pictures here just showing the patterns in the water.
Flying alongside the Confederation Bridge was most enjoyable. The scenery and the blue water effect, and just looking down at the bridge as we were flying alongside it was was quite a highlight of our trip. Of course, during the time I was flying over the water alongside the bridge there, I was monitoring those engine instruments extra carefully to make sure nothing was going wrong with the engine during that time. And here we are, we're just arriving on the shore of Prince Edward Island, so we made it safe and sound across the body of water, and we're heading over to the Charlottetown Prince Edward Island Airport. And here we are now. We're just coming straight in on final approach for the runway at Charlottetown Prince Edward Island Airport, and we're just getting ready to land. So we traveled approximately a total of I would say about a little over 10 hours of airtime and 1,800 kilometers the route that we took, which wasn't the most direct route, but roughly about 1,800 kilometers of distance. After we landed, we picked up our rental bikes, and somebody from the airport gave us a ride, and we went to get our rental bicycles, and we cycled an unbelievable 55 kilometers to our cottage. It was one heck of a workout. We definitely miscalculated how long it would take, but it was all worth it. When we finally got to our cottage, it was just a really, really nice cottage right next to the ocean, and for me, it was just much nicer than what I had expected. And these are just a few pictures of our cottage from the outside and the inside. It was beautifully renovated and basically had everything we could ask for. We arrived at the cottage on August the 13th, the day we were supposed to get there, so we were right on time. And the next day, August the 14th, it just rained all day, but we did have a chance to purchase some groceries, so we were just quite relaxed in our cottage, enjoying it, and nice and dry inside. After we were on Prince Edward Island for a few days, we rented a car, and we drove over to Shediac, New Brunswick, and we had a look at an airport that was for sale. It's been for sale for quite a while, but we thought I'd take a look at it in person and see what the neighborhood was like, and just something that crossed my mind a few times, that it wouldn't be bad to live on an airport. But who knows, maybe in the future.
On our way,
We did a little bit of cycling around after the following day when the rain was finished, and we just enjoyed some of the spectacular beaches on Prince Edward Island, and it was just a very, very nice place to visit. The area that we stayed on Prince Edward Island was called North Restico, and North Restico was a nice, quaint little area of shops and homes. One of the things we saw when we were there was one evening we were there, some incredible storm clouds started coming in, but we checked on our phones just to make sure there was no tornadoes or something like that lingering. So you can see by these pictures how dramatic the clouds were. Very, very interesting.
on our way back, we ran into a couple of periods of pretty bad weather, and were not able to get home as quickly as we had planned. So we ended up being uh, in Grand Falls for a number of days in New Brunswick, but it was a lovely place to visit, and we did a lot of touring around Grand Falls, did all of their walking trails, and saw all of the sights there were to see there, including all of the potato fields, and drove by the McCain French fry plant as well, which is in that area.
After we left Grand Falls, we headed over to River de Lou, and because of the strong winds and relatively low clouds, I decided to fly above the clouds, and that was quite spectacular. We actually climbed up to 6,500 feet in our little two-seater airplane, and that was quite enjoyable, and it made our flight smooth. The only problem is we had like about a 50-mile-an-hour headwind, so we weren't getting there as quickly as we thought we would, but nevertheless we got there, and it took a little longer, but it was also a very nice place, River de Lou. We wound up staying, I think it was another 3 nights in River de Lou, and after we left River de Lou, we followed the St. Lawrence River down towards Quebec City, and Adrian will just talk about the islands that we were looking at on our way. This is a picture of the Walmart parking lot in River de Lou, and it was kind of neat to see how all the motorhomes would pull in at night, and it became quite a community. So it was, oh, you never know, maybe someday in the future we'll be doing that. One of the reasons we stayed in River de Lou for 3 days is because it became incredibly windy. We were getting over 50-kilometer gusts, and we just decided, well, we're not going to fly in that. That would be a little bit too uncomfortable. So, yeah, here's a picture of Adrian with her hair blowing in the wind. I thought it was kind of neat, and it was a very strong wind. We were close to the water here. This is a picture of the courtesy car that the airport lent us. It was an actual car that they used for driving around on the airport property. So it was kind of nice of them to lend it to us, and it made it easy for us to get around in town. There were no car rentals available on such a short notice. The day we left River de Lou, we had perfect flying conditions, and we actually flew all the way from River de Lou, stopping in Quebec City, and then stopping in Cornwall, and then stopping in Lindsay, and then our final destination was Burlington. That took us a total of 7.5 hours of actual air time. So that was a long day, but we did have just beautiful weather to do that. One exciting moment we had on our way home after we left River de Lou, and we headed over to Quebec City, and we landed at a small airport just outside Quebec City where they did skydiving. And as we were coming in for our landing, there must have been about 10 or 12 skydivers landing all around us. So that was a little unnerving. We didn't expect that. They were only communicating in French, so they didn't understand us and we didn't understand them. So that took us by surprise. We really didn't expect that, but nothing happened anyhow, so we made it safe and sound.
So this is a picture of Grocio, which was where many of the people who were fleeing the potato famine in the mid 1800s in Europe were landed and were quarantined actually for 45 days before they were allowed to go into Quebec City.
After we left Quebec City, we headed over to Cornwall, and just flying over the St. Lawrence River just before we got to Cornwall, it was quite spectacular. We have a short little video on that. It was very, very scenic flying over the St. Lawrence at that part of the trip, and then landing at the Cornwall airport. We stayed there for a couple hours. continued on to Lindsay. And we arrived at Lindsay, and as we were ordering some dinner, I decided to check the weather, and he said, the weather people said to us, well, if you want to fly to Burlington today, you better leave right now. So we had to cancel our dinner in a hurry and hop in the plane and go, because there was a pretty big, large front approaching us with bad weather. So we managed to make it all the way to Burlington about, I'd say, at least an hour before that weather started closing in on us, and we made it all the way back to Burlington. And when we arrived in Burlington, my sister Anna Marie and my brother-in-law Rudy were waiting there for us with a little wine and cheese celebration of our journey and our first cross-country flight in our homemade airplane, and that was very nice of them to do that. We really enjoyed that, and we had some really nice wine and cheese, and we socialized probably for, I guess, about an hour, and then we started to head home, and our trip was over. And well, thank you for watching our video and sharing this adventure with us. Till next time, I think our next vacation is going to be Oshkosh, Wisconsin, our next cross-country flight next summer.